your kids from school, come and spend a week with us in our drop-in centre for homeless people. It's life-changing for some of them. But anyway, one of the things we do is we bring them around some of the hostels. And they look at them and they say, God, this is lovely. I'm going to tell my mum I'm leaving home. I'm going to move in. They're lovely. Everybody has their own room. Some of the rooms are en suite. The place is bright, is cheerful. And we say to the kids, that's deliberate. Because the service you provide to homeless people sends a message to them. And the message is, this is how we value you. This is what we think you're worth. And if you put homeless people into a rundown building, cram them into bunk beds all packed up against one another, paint peeling off the walls, you're giving them a message. This is what we think of you. This is how society thinks of you. So we may be accommodating, we may be giving homeless people a bed for the night, but we're destroying their dignity. And I often have to advise homeless people to sleep rough, rather than go into those hostels. Most notorious of them, Camden Hall, we took it over. It's a kip. It's still a kip. It's a nicer kip than it was before we took it over, but it's still a kip. Why is it a kip? It's a kip because you have people 6 or 8 in a room. First come, first served. So you will have people in the middle of the night, half the room will be using drugs in the middle of the night, they'll be offering you drugs, they'll be robbing your stuff to pay for their drugs, and there's not much we can do about that. We have taken it over for 6 months. We have said we will run that till next March, but our purpose in running it is to close it. And if we haven't closed it by next March, we're pulling out, saying we're not running this anymore. So yeah, I think it is important that you affirm the dignity of homeless people by providing them, first of all, with safe and secure accommodation. And that means giving homeless people their own room, with a lock to their door, so that they can feel safe at night and their belongings can be secure. And if we can't provide that, I don't think we should have any business running those services. So, yeah, we have taken, at least the sheets now get changed every day, which they didn't. And at least they now have lockers to lock their stuff away, which they didn't. So, it's not, I don't make the decisions anymore. We have a CEO now who runs the organisation. I'm only a figurehead now, thank God. So I was opposed to us taking it over, because I said, no, this is not suitable for homeless people. It can never be made suitable for homeless people, and we shouldn't sort of confirm that this is a sort of place that homeless people could be housed in. But we have taken it over, but strictly with the purpose of closing it after the winter is over. And so our policy is we're going to move 5 people out per week. This is the idea, this is the theory anyway. Move 5 people out per week into other accommodation and not replace them in Camden Hall until it closes. Will that happen? I very much doubt it. There are so many people sleeping rough at the moment. So many.
I'm asking about the big issue. How kind of useful or successful or whatever do you think it is, and could it be improved in any way?
The big issues. I haven't had much contact with them for a long time. I did have at the beginning when they were starting. It has been very successful in England, and it has been primarily homeless people who are selling it, making a few bob. And the theory was you don't give people handouts, you give them hand-ups. And that was the theory. I'm not sure how well it works in Ireland. I don't hear very much about the big issues now. I don't even see it being sold very often on the street. So I suspect it has lost its passion, and it's lost its focus and its direction. But I think in theory it was a good idea and has been quite successful in England. I think the referendum was important, and I think it was important that we passed it. I think it says something about our society. Will it make any difference? Not in the short term. What children are suffering from is lack of services, and the referendum isn't going to change that. Now, possibly, and this is what I would hope for, that it does affirm the inalienable and inescapable, whatever it is, rights of children. I hope that lawyers will take that up and go to the courts to affirm, that children have a right, for example, to proper housing. That children who are living in overcrowded, unfit for human habitation housing, that might be challenged in the courts because of the insertion into the Constitution of the rights of a child. Similarly, huge number of children who are going to bed hungry every night. Huge number now. And again, I would hope maybe that can be challenged in the courts. But in the short term, I think it's more symbolic, except in those areas like adoption where children now can be adopted, whereas before they couldn't, certain categories of children couldn't be adopted. And I think they felt, they didn't feel they belonged to their foster family. They didn't feel integrated into their foster family because they didn't have the same name as the other children in the foster family. So the adoption was one practical thing. Listening to the voices of the children in civil or criminal proceedings is also a practical thing. But by and large, it won't have a huge impact on the services for children.
Maybe just one or two more. You have a question? No?
When you were talking about the private sector didn't put in enough housing and problems in terms of stock, what would be your views on the repurposing of NAMI units, both on sort of like a personal level and also sort of more strategically?
Yeah, NAMA have offered 2,000 units to the Department of Housing for social housing in general, not just homeless people, but they have offered it. 2,000, there's 98,000 officially on the housing waiting list, so 2,000 is better than nothing, but it's still only a drop in the ocean. Of those 2,000, only 700 were found to be suitable. Many of the housing units NAMA has are not suitable for housing poor people or homeless people. They're located on the outskirts of towns. There's no public transport, there's no services, there's no shops, there's no schools or creches. You really need a car to live in those out-of-the-way places. So they're not suitable for poorer families or for homeless people. But there are certainly properties that would be suitable. And I think NAMA should be asked to provide perhaps a lot more than they have been doing. Yeah. Yes. But ultimately, we got to provide social housing. We got to start investing in social housing. And that is absolutely out for this government. They are not going to invest any more money in social housing, in capital social housing. Private landlords, their job is making a profit. That's the business. They're not social workers. Their job is making a profit. And if you own a building and you've paid $360,000 for that building, and Dublin City Council comes along and says, will you house homeless drug users? You'd want to be a landlord with a great social conscience to say yes.
Thank you very much, Peter. Could I ask a question? Because what I hear is that the level of services at every level seems to be very, very inadequate. And yet, within Irish society, there seems to be a great reluctance to pay tax. Is the inadequacies as much a reflection on our society as it is on government policy that people won't vote for tax rises?
Oh, I think very much so, yeah. It's a reflection on the culture that we have allowed to develop in this country where people are opposed. First of all, that culture is highly individualistic. It's me, 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 me. And the Celtic Tiger aggravated that individualism as central to our culture. So people are very reluctant to see their standard of living challenged by paying higher taxes in order that other people's standard of living might increase. So I think it is a reflection on our culture. You know, we had, I don't remember exactly the figures, but a couple of years ago we had something like 240 high-worth individuals who were tax exiles. Today we have, I think, something like 2,000 in the last few years. People just who do not want to contribute. They want what their money is theirs, and they will do everything possible to try and ensure that that money remains theirs and isn't diverted into government expenditure. So I think we do have to link poor services with low taxes. And we do have to challenge that culture, which is unwilling to pay extra tax in order to improve the services. I'm not talking about middle income. Middle income people now are squeezed. I'm not talking about middle income people. You know, they're the ones who have been hardest hit by this recession. Homeless people are not the ones who have been hardest hit. I mean, life for homeless people is more difficult now than it was during the Celtic Tiger years, but it hasn't been a life-changing change. Homeless people, during the Celtic Tiger years, they got a higher dole payment. The dole payment may have lasted for 5 days. Now there's a reduced dole payment, and the payment is lasting maybe only 4 days. But the people for whom this recession is a life-changing experience are people who had good jobs, lovely homes, have lost their jobs, in danger of losing their homes, seeing their children emigrating. For them, it's a life-changing experience. And they are being squeezed now. As much as the poor people. So I think it's interesting that during the Celtic Tiger years we never heard once of the word solidarity from the government. Never mentioned it once in all their elections and all their time. And as soon as the recession came in, out came the word solidarity. And what does the word solidarity mean for the government? It meant that everybody, including the poorest, must bear their share of the burden. That's not what solidarity means. Solidarity means that those who can afford it have to take on the burden of those who cannot afford it and help to relieve that burden on those who cannot afford it. That's what the word solidarity means. Not that everybody, including the poor, must lower their standard of living so that, there are a lot of people in this country for whom the word recession is just a word in a dictionary. They're not experiencing anything like it. There is a proposal that we would increase the universal social charge from 7 to 10% for those on incomes of over 100,000 euros a year. And my understanding is that there are Fine Gael TDs who are totally opposed to that idea. And that beggars belief. And indeed there's an article in the Irish Times today about criticising this idea that those over 100,000 should be paying any more tax. So there is a culture there that what I have is mine, and if I'm determined to keep it. We've seen that with some other high-profile individuals.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course you can.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, you've talked about catering for the whole person in their rehabilitation and drug use. What do you think about methadone? Do you think it's making people state-sponsored addicts and rushing them under the carpet, taking them off the agenda? They go on disability when, by and large, when they go on methadone? Or do you think it's easy?
I think methadone is a useful tool. It has a lot of advantages. It means people don't have to rob to buy their drugs. It means they're not buying drugs that are contaminated and adulterated with substances they don't know. They're not risking HIV and AIDS or Hep C. Methadone has a lot of advantages. But to my mind, it should be a step in a process towards abstinence. That process could be a very long process. It could be 10 or 15 years for some long-term drug users. But the objective should always be to get people off all drugs, including methadone. But for the medical profession, many of the methadone is seen as the solution to the drug problem. It's not a solution to the drug problem. They're still addicted to a drug, only the drug now is methadone. Methadone is more addictive than heroin. If somebody wants to go through cold turkey, I advise them to go back on heroin for a couple of weeks, because the withdrawal pains will be less severe than the withdrawal pains coming off methadone. Methadone is more addictive than heroin, and it is just as dangerous as heroin. So it's still a drug, and everybody I know who's been on methadone for any length of time wants to come off it. They feel trapped by their methadone. They wake up on a Saturday morning, they sleep it out, they wake up at 11:30, the clinic is closed, they're going to go dying sick for the rest of the day. And if they want to buy something, they'll find it much easier to buy heroin than to buy methadone on the streets. So, and they can't go on holidays. It's a huge effort to go on holidays. You have to persuade your clinic or your doctor to give you takeaways, and then you have to make sure the takeaways, the bottle doesn't break when you're away on your holidays, or that it doesn't get stolen. So they all know they're trapped or enslaved by their addiction to methadone, and they all come to a point where they want to get off methadone, but many doctors are very reluctant to encourage that to happen. They see methadone like insulin. Somebody has diabetes, you give them insulin, give them their injection, they take their injection every day and they can live a normal life. And I think some in the medical profession see methadone, somebody has an addiction to heroin, give them methadone, let them take methadone every day for the rest of their lives, and they can live a normal life. But that's not how they experience, that's not how the people on methadone experience it. And they do want to come off. So I think, when they're looking at statistics and they say, oh, we have so many people who have been on methadone for 10 years, and they're saying this as a success story, to my mind that's a failure story. That they should be helping people to come off the methadone rather than to stay on it.
Very last one. Stupid question.
I hope I don't make you repeat yourself, but what are your thoughts on the current criminal justice system in regards to...
The criminal justice system? For drug users or just in general?
With regards, let's say, homeless people going in and maybe just being thrown by
it's a bit of a disaster. The vast majority of people who go into our prisons, their characteristics, their profile is very well documented. Vast majority are early school leavers, they have varying levels of illiteracy, they have no skills or qualifications, they've never had a decent job, they may have been homeless or have had mental health issues or both. So the profile is very clear, and we're putting them into overcrowded, drug-filled, violent prisons. It's a disaster. I tell judges, look, if somebody doesn't have a drug problem, you should think very hard before you send them into prison. Because I know about 40 people who went into prison who never touched drugs before they went into prison, and they came out addicted to heroin. Because you're in a drug-filled environment. You may be sharing a cell with somebody who's using heroin. And because life in prison is so boring and so meaningless, you're so fed up that if the opportunity to take drugs comes, you're probably just going to say yes, just to relieve the boredom of life in prison. So it's pretty disastrous. I'd have a lot of criticism. We have produced, where I work as well, in the Jesuit Centre for Faith and Justice, we have produced a fairly substantial book on the Irish prison system, which is very critical of the prison system. So, it's a disaster, and it often does more harm than good. You have somebody going into prison, maybe we had a guy who had his own apartment. He had just got his own apartment, and he had just got custody of his child, which he had never had. The child's 5 years old, he had never had custody of his child before. And he was sent to prison for 3 months for something that had happened maybe 12 months ago. He lost his apartment, child was taken back into care, and when he was released, he was back on the streets again. I mean, I think particularly district court judges need to think long and fast before they send people to prison.
Okay guys, so we're going to leave it there, but please join us next door for a reception, and once again, thank you very much, Peter.